You okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Welcome everybody to our annual State of the Village event. I believe, Tammy was going to check on this, but I believe this is our 10th annual State of the Village. 2013, I believe, was the first year we did this. I look forward to it every year. It's a way to bring everyone up to speed on things we've been working on over the course of the year. Usually we're relatively busy with projects and initiatives, and this year is no different. Very briefly, just to introduce everyone who's here that is either works for the village or is a member of the village board. We have our treasurer, Victoria Badalamenti, in the back of the room, signing people in. We have Tammy Morse, our village clerk, who has stepped out of the room for the moment. We have trustee Keith Hannon down on the end. Trustee Ben Darkler making sure that the camera is recording because we are not live streaming today's meeting. Trustee Ben Carver. Sitting in the middle, we have trustee Jessica Giles on this end, and I'm your village mayor, Gordon Hart. We're going to be going through these slides relatively quickly. We had actually entertained the idea of not doing a PowerPoint so that everyone stays awake, but there are enough items that we want to not forget to cover that we are going to itemize some of the things we're talking about. As I say, I want to go through this relatively quickly, and I also want to field questions as we go. I want to field questions as we go rather than expecting everyone to hold on to the end with questions. So let's keep this relatively informal. If we speed through things too quickly, raise a hand and say, can you go back and repeat what you just said? And if you have specific questions about some of the items that we're going to cover, please ask as we go.
All the way to the left.
And we do have time for Q&A at the end. So 2021 year in review. Quite a few things occurred in 2021. We have a CPZR update, which will actually be, Trustee Darfur will cover in the next slide. But our Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Revision Committee continued its work for the third year, concluding with a revised comprehensive plan, which we did formally adopt towards the end of the year. It was the 70th anniversary of the incorporation of our Trumansburg Fire Company. Near and dear to our hearts. I think Jules was there when they incorporated. We sit, of course, in the meeting room of the fire company, and the work that the fire company does, not only in their official capacities, but as volunteer members in the community, can't be emphasized enough. So I do just want to take a moment to thank all of the membership, long-standing, new membership of the fire company. I will also just mention that it's a trend around the country, but certainly in our area of the country, to see volunteerism dropping off in all types of organizations. It's not just first responders. I hear stories from the Lions Club, Rotary, name your civic organization. There tends to be a struggle to find new membership. Our fire company has bucked that trend. We have a relatively large fire company relative to our community size. The number of active members is increasing, not by large leaps and bounds, but a couple members a year. They tend to have a good ability to recruit new membership. And at the risk of sounding ageist, our average age of our fire company is actually declining, which is something you simply don't see anywhere else. And regionally, we see a real issue with other fire companies, and their officers and their more active members tend to be folks in their 50s, 60s, and sometimes 70s and 80s. Whereas our average age of our line officers, I think, is in their early 40s or late 30s even. So, yeah, again, thanks to the Trumansburg Fire Company for all the work they do and for maintaining.
We have 28 certified interior firefighters.
Wow.
28 interior certified. We will have an update on our police reform efforts. Former Governor Cuomo mandated that all municipalities with police departments provide a report on their activities and areas where they could improve. That was due in April of 21, which we did submit on time. Big news in the community was, for the first time in over 60 years, the property to our north, formerly known as Alvos Manufactured Home Park, changed ownership towards the end of the year. I believe August was the closing date. Ithaca Neighborhood Housing actually was approached by New York State and asked whether they would be interested in purchasing the property. New York State has set aside money to help with those purchases. The state is concerned about a trend that's begun to increase over the last decade or so of private equity firms and corporations purchasing mobile home parks, milking them for every nickel they're worth, and then turning around and selling them without any improvements to the property over a period of time. So New York State is trying to get in front of that and is leaning on or reaching out to not-for-profits like an INHS, who have long histories and long track records of managing properties, and asking them to step into the fray. So when I first heard of it, I thought that it was an interesting initiative, and I'm pleased that it went the way that it did. INHS has already received some ZBA approval for some significant improvements they want to make to water and sewer infrastructure, roads, and so forth, so we can begin to see some very long overdue, I think, long overdue improvements to the property begin to occur, hopefully this year. We did some stormwater infrastructure work thanks to grant money which was awarded to us from former Assemblymember Lipton's office. That work primarily focused on Seneca Road to open up some of the drainage flow for stormwater that tends to bottleneck further up Seneca Road in the Prospect Street area and further west. That work is ongoing, and you'll hear more about that as we go on. The general need for more stormwater management throughout the village. Camp Baden, and I'm happy to field questions on this because we don't have it. We don't have any information on this later on in the presentation. But as many of you may know, the Boy Scouts of America at the national level have been in federal court for some time. They're in the process or in the last steps of finalizing a very large settlement, somewhere in the $800 to $900 million range. And the local Boy Scouts councils from around the country are being asked to help fund that settlement. The Baden Powell Council, which is located in the Binghamton area, owns Camp Baden on the shores of Cuba Lake, just north of our municipal boundary, just over the county line in Seneca County. And they also own some property down in the Windsor area. And the council has, over the years, been interested in potentially selling off Camp Baden, because the focus of the camp, and some of this is second and third hand from some members of the council who provided this information, the focus of the council tends to have been moving in the direction of the greater Binghamton area. So while the Lakeshore camp is nice, they also feel, at least some members of the council seem to feel, that it's a bit far flung for where they're located. Plus they realize that Cuba Lakeshore property is hard to come by and very valuable. With the mandate from their national organization to come up with somewhere in the order of $1.2 to $1.5 million to contribute to the national trust fund that's being set up for the settlement, they began to look at Camp Baden as a way to fund that. We first heard or caught wind of it last summer. I wasn't sure necessarily how much the village should be involved, although we do have vested interest in the property, because half of our water system is provided, or half of our water supply is provided by our original water well located at Camp Baden. We have an easement, which under legal review appears to be very, very strong, but we have an easement which was written in the late 60s, which gives the village the right to operate that water well. It gives the village the right to operate it in perpetuity, and we are under no obligation to supply the camp ownership with water, except for the Boy Scouts. So we've been providing the Boy Scouts with water since the 60s. We're obligated to continue to do that, but if ownership changes hands, we're not necessarily obligated to provide the new owner with water. So somewhere in all of that, I began to ask some questions, and then suddenly everyone was very interested. Town of Ulysses is interested in what becomes of that property, primarily from a recreation standpoint. Town of Covert was less interested to begin with, but has become more interested as we have begun discussions. Initially, the state park system was not interested at all in participating in any efforts that might happen at Camp Baden. And then we were approached by two members of the Baden Powell Council who are more local to the area, who really want to try to preserve the property. So that was back in September. Fast forward a couple of months, and in conversations with Assemblymember Kellis, who I think most of you may know is a Trumansburg native, she became very interested in making an effort to try to preserve the property in its current form, similar to what happened with the Bell Station property across the lake in Lansing. She, that's Anna Kellis, along with Andy Zepp from the Finger Lakes Land Trust, Senator Helming from the Senate District to our north, and others began to come up with an idea that if we could get the governor's attention, perhaps the governor might step in. Of course, we had a change in governorship mid-year last year, which was part of the calculus, because Governor Hochul is from upstate New York. She was a town board member once upon a time, so she understands small municipal needs, certainly much better than the former governor did. And the effort was made to try to get the governor's office attention. That was successful, and Governor Hochul handed off the issue to the Commissioner of Parks, Eric, and I won't try to pronounce his last name, who then turned around and told Fred Bond, who's a village resident, I don't know if Fred is here today, told Fred that state parks would be very interested in what can be done, what could we come up with. So where we stand as of now, and we have a meeting on the 15th, which will be in this room if anyone's interested in attending. Where we stand now is that New York State Parks is interested in the full acquisition of the property. Oddly enough, I thought this would be the big hurdle. The funding or the money necessary, regardless of how much the value is apparently not an issue for state parks. They apparently have lots and lots and lots of money set aside for land acquisition. So my question was, if it's 3 million or 13 million, does that matter? And the answer was no. The problem is it has to appraise for a certain value. So like any property, Parks will hire an appraiser. The appraiser will say this is what it's worth, and that is the number Parks will offer. They don't negotiate up or down. If it appraises for 8 million, they'll say we'll give you 8 million. If it appraises for 2 million, they'll say we'll give you 2 million. However, Parks is not interested at all in the ongoing maintenance or management of the property. They're willing to own it, but they're not willing to manage it. There are several state parks around the state, one in Canandaigua, one in the Adirondacks, and I think Beechwood State Park in Sodus, where state parks owns the property, but they contract with the local municipalities to manage it. And so the meeting that we're holding on the 15th is to find out where is the willingness between the town of Ulysses, the town of Covert, and the village to come up with some type of a joint municipal management of the property. Ongoing costs range anywhere, depending on whose estimates you use, anywhere from $250,000 to $400,000 a year. However, the municipalities get to recoup through park revenue those costs. So we have to start looking at cost projections. What do we think we can get in terms of revenue? How many years is it going to take to get up to full income from the parks? What other activities could we potentially put down there? So as you can imagine, there's a lot of moving parts. And to add to the mix, state park acquisition takes between 14 and 18 months because the Attorney General has to sign off on it, the State Comptroller has to sign off on it. So we'll have to figure out if Parks does in fact end up putting in an offer to purchase the property. If that value is enough that the Boy Scouts agree to it, then how do we bridge that time frame? What other players have to be involved, perhaps the Land Trust being one? What other players have to be involved so that the Boy Scout Council gets the money when they need it? And we, the municipalities, have enough time to come up with an operating arrangement that is satisfactory to Parks, satisfactory to our residents, and gives us the ability to recoup costs over a long period of time. As I said, if there are questions, yeah, Deb?
Yeah, Baden is in Seneca County, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's in Covert,
Yes,
and it has nothing, it's not in the village.
correct.
Why are we in this conversation? Are you planning on annexing it?
Now, the conversation is twofold. One is Ulysses and the village have been very interested in expanding the rec program. So the existing Ulysses Trumansburg recreation program, which has been doing very well in the last couple of years in spite of COVID, needs space. So the use of the property for recreation would be very helpful to the program itself. My primary concern for the village specifically is the well. And so it is half of our water system, as you know. The easement is, as you well know, the easement is strong, but you know, the one version of this movie that I think is relatively realistic and a lot of folks are trying to avoid is it's a beautiful property. And if the council is looking to get $3.5 million for the main 90 acres, it would make for a very nice resort development. If you imagine Harbor Hotel in Watkins Glen on that property, jet ski rentals, parasailing, you name it. I mean, it's a nice, Frontenac Point is a nice spot. Now that's a big project, you know, that's probably a $45 million project, but someone sooner or later will do it on Cuba Lake, on the wine trail and so on. And although we're not obligated to supply them with water, I don't know what that kind of development and construction will do to the geology of the camp vis-a-vis how it would then affect our water supply. So some of it's preemptive, some of it is the use for recreation, and if we can recoup cost, which is the big question, and make it revenue neutral at some point, then it's probably worth pursuing. Yeah, David.
I'm just wondering where, if there were emergencies at that property, who would respond?
We already do. That camp is within our fire protection district and within our EMS coverage area, and we'll have a lot to say about EMS coverage here in a few minutes. So it's already the village's responsibility.
And does our DPW do anything down there to maintain any of the infrastructure for the water?
For our water system, yes.
Okay.
Not for the water distribution to the Boy Scouts in their camp area. They have several buildings,
Okay.
Commercial kitchen, and so on. So that is the Scouts' responsibility at present.
Great, thank you.
I also wanted to address that we are members of the Cuba Watershed Intermunicipal Organization, affectionately called CUIO. And so the recognition, Deb, is a great point that while it's not within our village border, that we are part of a larger geographical reality, especially because of Cuba Lake, and it is walkable. So it's a 6-mile loop if you start at the conservatory here and go down Frontenac. You have to cross 89, so look both ways, and come back up. So in keeping with who we are and speaking sort of events and tourism, to make sure that that asset is something we could access is pretty unique.
We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but there have already been conversations, or I've had a conversation with Fred Bond, the regional park manager or supervisor, about extending the Black Diamond Trail down to the camp if it were to come under state control. That would be something that the state would fund. So I'm trying to figure out ways that if this happens, that we can make it happen with as much of state parks money and as little of the municipality's money as possible. But again, devil's in the details. We have a meeting on the 15th to see what the willingness of the 3 municipal boards are. There is actually not a requirement for Covert to be involved, but it certainly makes sense that they would be, since the camp resides in Covert. But the ability of state parks to contract with a third party to manage a property is entirely up to them. It doesn't even have to be anyone local. So we'll see how that develops. And I see a hand. Yeah.
I live in Covert and I go to the town board meetings there, and one of the big issues that they've been dealing with for several years is that bridge down there. So that's $1.5 million that needs to be spent by somebody because it just is shot, that bridge.
My understanding is that Covert has applied for a Bridge New York grant. If they haven't, then I wrote a letter of support for no reason, but certainly if it was state park property, it would seem like the Bridge New York grant would come through. So those are the kinds of things that lots of moving parts, and none of this would have happened if Parks hadn't decided they were interested in the acquisition. So that was really when you have a state entity, the numbers are so large it's hard to fathom. The state budget is $212 billion with a B. So for them to cough up a few $1 million for a piece of land is not even a rounding error, actually. So their willingness to participate is huge.
Do you think it would be worthwhile for a letter writing campaign to Parks and say we support this?
Parks is already on board. So Parks' position as of last week was, we want to buy the property, we don't want to manage it. Can you municipalities figure out a way to do it? And so that's part of the meeting on the 15th. It may at some point come to letters and phone calls locally. I think Ulysses and Trumansburg were at a historic, Ulysses and Trumansburg have the best collaborative relationship that I've ever seen between these two municipalities, going back a ways. Covert is Covert, and they have to decide how much they want to participate or not.
I'm going to run for the board this year, so I might be able to help with that.
Well, we're not supposed to solicit campaign donations at the State of the Village meeting, but that'll be helpful with that case. Anything else on Camp Barton? We can certainly come back to it later if there are other questions. Annexation is on this list only very briefly because it got so much press. And like some things that get so much press that end up being much ado about nothing, I did want to mention the whole annexation conversation is not dead by any means, but it's basically a desire on the part of Grassroots, which now owns what will, at least in my mind, always be referred to as the Duddleston property behind the SureSafe. And to a lesser extent, PRI, which is the manager and caretaker of Smith Woods, but primarily it's driven by Grassroots, their desire to have better access to water and sewer infrastructure. As they are currently within the town of Ulysses, in order for them to get municipal water, there has to be a water district formed, which is a function of the town. And then they have to purchase that water from somewhere, ostensibly the village. They would not have any access to sewer infrastructure regardless. The town could create a sewer district if they wanted. The village is not interested in extending its sewer capacity outside of the village, and DEC probably wouldn't let us. If that property, however, was annexed into the village, they would immediately gain access to water by right, and they would immediately gain access to sewer infrastructure by right, at their cost, but they would have access to it. No one could say no. So that's what's kind of driven this conversation, which has almost not really been a conversation. It's been more of a, wouldn't it be nice type of thought process over the last couple of years. Where it currently stands is there is no annexation petition before either of our boards. The process for annexation requires the property owners to request it. There was a request submitted and then withdrawn last year due to some technicalities of the filing, and nothing has been resubmitted. So if that were to come forward, I believe they would actually submit the request to the town of Ulysses first. But at some point, if that does happen or were to happen, the village would certainly make sure everyone was aware. Ben, comprehensive plan update.
Yes, great. I will talk briefly about what we've been up to with the comprehensive plan over the past year. As many of you might know, the comprehensive plan process kicked off in 2018. So this has been quite some time coming. At that point, the committee was formed and we engaged, we opened up an RFC for additional planning help, and we solicited that and ended up picking up a group out of Syracuse, EDR, to help us with this project. So through 2019 and 2020, there was a significant amount of effort on the behalf of the CPZR committee, some members here, so I appreciate everyone's time and effort that's been put into that. And in the beginning of last year, that came to fruition after feedback from the community by way of surveys and public information meetings pre-pandemic. We had an initial draft that was presented to the public, as well as this board and various other places for kind of initial feedback. That process went through the rest of the spring with this board, the planning board and the zoning board all having a look at the draft plan, as well as getting feedback from the public. And by the summer, we had a kind of revised draft that was substantially complete at that point. And that brought us into more of the formal review section of the comprehensive plan process. That, for New York state law, is required to have a formal review by our planning board, a formal review by the county planning department, and then we go through our own formal review as a village board. So these processes take some time, there's waiting periods and so on and so forth. So we worked through that through the summer. We also included a couple of public information meetings, one virtually and one at the farmers market area, that were fairly well attended, especially the farmers market one. And by the fall, we had kind of heard all the feedback, incorporated that all back in, and were able to start having the public hearings and required review by this board. So there was a formal public hearings through the fall, as well as the formal environmental review of the comprehensive plan. All of that concluded in an exceptionally long document and resolution that we read through at great length in December. And we have finally adopted that comprehensive plan. So that's been a 3-year process ongoing. A huge amount of thank you to everyone in the community, on the various boards, especially the comprehensive plan committee itself, who put a lot of time and effort into feedback, review, drafting, and so forth, to make this really just a fantastic plan that I think will help us, pave a path forward over the next 5 to 10 years as we move through the different areas that have been called out and the different projects that we'd like to take on. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them now, but I don't need to take too much more time.
And I do want to, and I've said this before, but I definitely want to say it again. I want to thank Ben and all of the members of the CPZR. When you, and I think we can all relate in any aspect of life or work, when you task a group of folks with a job, you don't always necessarily know ahead of time what the commitment level or work effort will be, based on personal interest and whatnot. And I can't emphasize enough how much effort, work, commitment, and dedication this group put into this effort. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of hours poring over text and detail and just the level of consideration and thoughtfulness that went into the process is fantastic. So thank you, Ben. Thank you to the members of the committee for this effort and the ongoing effort with respect to the zoning. So 2022, hard to believe we were already more than a month in. We have the ongoing zoning revision, which we'll have some more detail on the next slide again as to what the process will look like. Stormwater management. So we all know we have lots of water, and if you're interested, look at a topographic map of the village sometime. It's very interesting because the village is located in somewhat of a side of a hill. And if you imagine driving into Trumansburg from Covert, you kind of crest the hill where the new cell tower is, and then it slopes downwards into the village. And yet we have these areas within the village, which, for instance, up here, Seneca Street area is above the post office, and yet it retains water. So we're a village in the side of the hill with these little bowl areas. And water likes to flow downhill except when it can't. And so it's going to be a long, and probably overdue, but a long process to come up with a way to engineer stormwater drainage, to send it somewhere. Now, historically, what people have done is send it into their neighbor's yard, and then when their neighbor fixes their problem, they send it into their neighbor's yard, and so on. And so where you see collaboration with the town of Ulysses, it should include Seneca County as well, but that's its own issue. Collaborating with the town of Ulysses as they begin some stormwater and water infrastructure research of their own will be important, particularly at the southern end of the village, Pennsylvania Larchmont, Tamarack area. There is a place for that water to go. Trumansburg Creek is is at Boardman Creek. One of those creeks is down kind of behind that area, but we've got to get the water to it, which means running through private property and/or town roads. So that'll be an ongoing effort. It's probably a decade's worth of effort to be able to adequately address the stormwater issues that we face within the village. Sidewalk capital plan. This is new. So we've always talked about sidewalk, but we've never really developed a plan. It's my opinion that the areas of the village, which are village streets, where sidewalk is desired, and someone made the interesting point a few weeks ago when I was talking about it, that maybe there are some village streets where the folks don't want sidewalks. Well, that's interesting. It seems like everyone who wants sidewalks says so. But where there are village streets, where the residents do want sidewalks, or where it's a safety issue, that is going to have to come out of village dollars. There really isn't a way for us to adequately apply for or receive grant funding for those areas. State roads, on the other hand, there's a lot of grant money available. We just have to take the time to find it and apply for it. There's a fair amount of infrastructure money, as you probably heard, coming out of the federal government. So we haven't put together the formal plan yet, but it's going to at least include sidewalk from the farmers market to Seneca Road, right outside here on West Main Street. That will have to be federal or state money because it's a state road. And then village streets, where do we want sidewalks, where don't we want sidewalks, how do we fund it, how much do we allocate per year? And we're heading into budget season, so if anyone likes numbers, please come to meetings. Is it 30,000 a year, is it 50,000 a year? As we allocate funding for fire trucks, we should also allocate funding for village sidewalks. Yeah.
You said state road is paid for, or can get paid for. So are the sidewalks like along 96, is that state road or is that village? Like in front of your house, is that a state?
So all of the village is responsible for the maintenance of all of our sidewalks, regardless of where they're located. But we can't put in a sidewalk on Main Street without state DOT permission. We can't even stripe, technically, we can't even stripe the road without state DOT permission. So because it's a state right-of-way, we need their permission, which then also leads to accessibility to their money. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the infrastructure bill, has something in the order of $300 or $400 billion allocated for roads and that type of infrastructure. When you hear roads, that automatically means bridges and sidewalks too, because they're part of the right-of-way of those streets. So some of that is flowing through to New York State. I just got an email yesterday about the grant application deadline is sometime in April. So we are going to have to move relatively quickly, but I want to apply in this round of funding for sidewalks right outside on this state road. Again, village streets, the sidewalks attached to them. So if you think of Elm Street going up towards Juniper Hill Bed and Breakfast, if we were to put in new sidewalk there, that would be on us, most likely. There have been exceptions to that. The sidewalk that runs down South Street was grant funded, partially. Some of it was also borrowed. So you can sometimes stretch federal or state dollars allocated for state roads to a connector road.
Yeah, well, like this sidewalk ends at Lake Street, and then there's just grass to El Dorado. So, I mean, is that still state road there?
Yes. We would have to, the village can conceivably pay for that, but we would still need the state's permission to do any work there. Anything else on sidewalks? Yeah.
Yeah, how will you decide street by street whether the sidewalk is wanted or not?
That's a great question. And I don't have an answer. That's part of the capital plan that we have to construct is, are we going to use what is now a 15-year-old walkability study from the county to determine that? Are we going to do surveys of the residents on the street? What happens if there are 10 residents on the street and 8 want it and 2 don't? Or 2 want it and 8 don't? And we have to kind of think through how we'll manage that. Dollars and cents will dictate a lot of that too. So if you have input on that process, we'd certainly be interested.
And I do just want to add that if the board recognizes it will definitely be in communication with the citizens, so not just an isolated decision.
I've already mentioned Camp Barton, we've talked about that, but that isn't an ongoing project that may or may not come to any type of fruition. We have a meeting on the 15th. One thing I didn't mention earlier is if this moves forward, it's obviously a multi-year process. If State Parks wants to purchase the property, 14 to 18 months means middle of 23, which means the summer of 24 would be the first year of operation. Would it be fully operational, or would we just be caretakers of the property at that point? These are all the details that we need to flesh out. Fire and EMS facility. So this building, lovely as it is, this building is obsolete. And by obsolete, I mean it does not have the capacity to do what our departments need it to do, specifically with respect to things like hazmat decontamination, bloodborne pathogen containment. On our EMS side, we don't have appropriate sleeping quarters, sleeping facilities, showers and the like, and so on for our 24-hour EMS staff. We did have an engineer develop a plan to retrofit this building to bring it up to modern specifications, 5-6 years ago now. The price tag was $1.5 million, and there were 3 times as many people in this room at that State of the Village who said, please no, please no, please no, that's too much. So we went back to the drawing board, and over the last couple of years, I've had several productive conversations with some of your favorite congressmen, the outgoing Congressman Tom Reed, who is a lot of things, but he is a friend of first responders, and he believes in the mission of fire departments and EMS and so on. And he has indicated an interest in allocating funding from the infrastructure bill for the construction of a new building that serves our 2 departments. We are waiting to find out what that looks like, because in DC, they tend to pass bills and then figure out how they're going to allocate the money after the fact. So we know how roads and bridges are going to get funded, and we know how water infrastructure is going to get funded, but they haven't gotten to public buildings yet. They're hoping that, this time frame, late January, early February, those terms will be disseminated, and then we can find out if Reed's office will keep their word and allocate some funding for a new fire and EMS building. The price tag on that building will be north of $8 million. So it's not something that the village can take on from a borrowing standpoint, even if interest rates are low or there's zero interest funding. That's just too much. But it is something that's needed. The fire department, and I sometimes still get questions from village residents. We're a small village with a small department, and I say, small village, large department. The fire department covers 56 square miles of territory, including our half of Cayuga Lake. We actually don't have adequate water rescue equipment. That's another topic. Our ambulance department, and we have a great slide that Trustee Carver will cover here in a few minutes. Our ambulance department officially covers 115 square miles of contracted area. However, we are responding to an area, we are actually responding to calls within an area of close to 400 square miles. So it's a large and growing department. We have facilities needs for our staff. We have facilities needs for our equipment. We have a non-binding verbal agreement, which is worth exactly what the paper it's printed on. We have a non-binding verbal agreement with INHS to allow us to site that new building on some of the vacant land that they've recently purchased adjacent to the former Alls Mobile Home Park, using a long-term ground lease, 99-year ground lease kind of thing that will be very cost-effective for the village from a land acquisition standpoint, but we need the money to build the building. And then last but not least for 2022 is the July, I think, is the 150th anniversary of the incorporation of the village. Abner Treeman settled the area in 1792, but there was no localized village government of any official capacity until 1872. So we will be planning some celebratory events throughout the year to commemorate that event. Back to zoning.
Yes, so zoning. So this is now, we were just talking about the comprehensive plan process. Roughly as soon as the comprehensive plan committee was able to provide that early draft to this village board, the committee has shifted its focus over to zoning. So for most of the past year, the comprehensive plan committee has been looking at our zoning. And as we've gotten into it, I've started to realize just the sheer volume and size of that undertaking. I think initially we hoped we had a couple hotspots we could address and we could kind of move on. And I think rightly so that the committee is taking a bit of a deeper look, trying to find that balance between we don't want to rewrite the whole thing, but we do want to feel like we've kind of gone through and at least reviewed and made sure that there's nothing kind of egregious that stands out that the committee thinks needs to take a deeper look at. To that end, that looks like possibly a 3-year process, again, with another longer term process, similar to the comprehensive plan. Something I've learned from the comprehensive plan process, though, is that trying to get meaningful engagement and feedback on a document and a revision of that size is difficult. People, and rightfully so, it's really difficult to sit down with a 100-page document and feel like you can look through it and make meaningful contributions and feedback. So I'm proposing, and we're going forward with this idea of a phased approach for zoning, with the hope that this allows us to both kind of create this more iterative process and continuously looking at our zoning and being able to revise it and keep adjusting it as we hear more from the community and from our boards about where it's serving us and where it isn't. But also, and I think mostly importantly, is that my hope is that it helps engage the community more effectively and provide a better place for review and feedback into the process. So to that end, we've broken this down into 3 different milestones. Near term this year, we have we're closing in on a revision of basically the residential zoning. That's, as you can imagine, the residential areas, which is most of the village outside of kind of the downtown Main Street corridor. And that looks at lot sizes, number of units on a lot, all that sort of thing, as well as everything else that kind of goes along with residential. When you think of home businesses, signage for that, parking, a number of other items that might go along with that. Also includes things like mobile home parks, which is a piece we're looking at. Things like something you'll hear quite a bit about, accessory dwelling units is becoming a more common term. The state budget is including legislation that would require the village to allow for accessory dwelling units. We'll see if that goes through or not. But we've been taking a look at that, reacting to it, and so there's a number of different pieces in there to look at. The hope with that is to have a draft by mid-year for review by this board, other boards, and of course the community. And again, trying to keep them as bite-sized as you can for a revision of this size so that we can have a better conversation about those changes and get more feedback from the community. Going forward, the next chunk we're looking at is short-term rentals and commercial industrial zoning. Short-term rentals being Airbnbs, VBROs, that sort of a thing. The commercial industrial zoning being mostly the downtown corridor. And then as we look further away, overlay districts for water, stormwater, wetlands, stream corridors, that sort of thing. And then kind of all the other little details that are in the zoning around the zoning board, how that works, how site plan works, some of these processes and practical applications of the zoning. So that's our milestones for now. We'll see how everything kind of plays out, but to give a kind of view of future events. I think probably the largest conversation that's upcoming is the short-term rental conversation. I know I hear quite a bit about it from folks in the community. I find it a fascinating conversation. There's many different angles to look at that question from, people who are renting out an extra room to make ends meet, people who are living next to a house that's fully rented every weekend and is a pain in the butt. You know, people who are looking to come come to and visit Trumansburg and enjoy what we have here, bring tourism dollars in and looking for a nice place to rent out. So there's a lot of different facets and ways to look at the conversation. I think we'll have an interesting conversation on how to look at short-term rentals, how to balance all those different pieces, and possibly how to kind of take a first step, knowing that we will take other steps with this idea of continuously reviewing and revising the zoning plan. So if the short-term rental conversation is something that's interesting to you, you have a particular lens that you see it through, whether as a renter or an owner or a neighbor, definitely please give me a talk, a chat. My hope is to be able to have a couple different concerted conversations, smaller group conversations about these different issues with the comprehensive plan committee, so that we can kind of bring those pieces together and try and synthesize something that hopefully balances everything. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I heard you say that overlay districts like water or whatever would come last, and I'm wondering if it would make, it looks like this list is driven by what kind of applications you're getting as opposed to what you're wanting to preserve for the community. So I'm wondering if it would make sense to look at the stuff that regulates how you could put something on a residential lot or how you could put something in a short-term rental or what, because of our resource, the water or the trees or the air quality or the whatever first, and then look at the other stuff. Once you've set that frame, just because we make the assumption the water will always be there, the water will always be there, the water will always be there. But when it's not, it's not. So just a suggestion.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. Interestingly enough, my read of our current overlay districts is that they're quite effective. In some ways, possibly overly slow. And so part of that conversation when we get to it is, do we have the right balance there? Do we have the right balance there? Part of that I think will be driven by continued improvements in flood mapping and 100-year storm projections and that sort of thing. A lot of that is ongoing or just starting to come online now. So we did want to delay it a little bit to make sure that we could respond to those sorts of things. But looking at what we currently have, I think we're well protected in many ways. And so I do see, this is in order simply just by the order of the zoning revision, the zoning document itself. But I do think it also tends to point at where we're hearing the most friction in the zoning ordinance currently, primarily around residential. The friction that I'm hearing in the overlay districts is more that they are overly onerous on landowners, possibly to the extent of being almost illegally onerous to the landowners. And that's the piece that we need to look at, but it does mean I think we can kind of come to it when we can get to it. At the same time, there's just a lot to get through there, and we have to kind of have some sort of order. So I think, I'm hoping that this is the right order, and we can always make adjustments. It's a number of years. We can always make adjustments if something really kind of crops up and starts becoming an issue for us that we have to look at.
Thanks.
All right. Aha! So we'll go right on to Public Works, Water and Sewer. I'll just jump right in. I don't know if I have a preamble here, but some of the top ideas and thoughts for the Public Works this year that I wanted to make sure to bring up here. I know a lot of people have been very interested in the status of the pedestrian bridge behind the post office on Greg Street. We have worked back and forth and gone around a couple different times on this, but we now finally do have an approach that is manageable and cost-effective to reopen the bridge. The idea being that the issue, to kind of zoom out, the issue with the bridge is not the bridge itself, but that it is sitting on an embankment which is crumbling out from underneath it. So, bridge might be fine, but it might still fall into the creek. Not a great thing for people to be walking over. The idea we have now is to add on to that bridge and extend it with supports back up the bank and up the street a bit to allow it to place its weight and its structural stability back further off on the creek bank. That will allow us to reopen it while we then take the next steps to figure out how to actually deal with the erosion that's going on around it. But that can be a future project. We can still have the bridge open in the meantime. So that plan is ongoing. We're waiting for materials to arrive for that. And when we have all those materials and there's time and space in the DPW schedule, that work is scheduled for hopefully this spring or summer to be able to reopen that bridge. The next two stormwater and sidewalk improvements, I think Rorden covered pretty well. The stormwater management is continuing. Oh, maybe before I jump off of that. Cynthia?
Thank you for working on the bridge and getting that going.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
I would love to walk over it. It's a lovely little bridge.
Thank you.
So as I was saying, I think Rorden covered the stormwater management and the sidewalk improvements pretty well. The stormwater management is definitely top of mind for me as well as part of the DPW. We have a bunch of different opportunities there, and I think it also deserves a larger kind of comprehensive approach that we'll be working through, sorting out what that looks like and how we put that together over this year, I would imagine. The sidewalk improvements, there's the larger improvements that I think Rorden was talking about. I think there's also, we're going to reinvest in this kind of continually every year building a small section on village streets. We're currently evaluating what's the best place to put that. Union Street from Main Street up to the conservatory seems to continue to rise to the kind of top of the list. So we'll be evaluating if that can be the build that we do this year. Nothing's set in stone, but that's kind of where our heads are right now. So for the last part, water and sewer rates, I did want to touch on. This is a conversation that comes up pretty much every year here. I'm taking over the reins from Deb now in explaining it. But about a decade ago, we embarked on capital improvement plans and projects for the water and for the sewer system. At that time, this is before my time on the board, but the projections at that time were that we would likely have to double the rates for water and sewer to be able to handle that additional cost to make those improvements. Thanks in large part to Deb's work, we were able to find grants and zero interest loans to fund a lot of that work, and we have yet to actually see that doubling of rates that we had anticipated. So I went back and pulled some numbers, and so far, since 2013, we've seen water increase about 10% on average, and the sewer rate increase about 25%. So we're quite a ways away from doubling, which is really fantastic to see. That said, we are likely to see some adjustments this year. We are in the process of building a capital plan, kind of a 10-year vision for water and sewer improvements that are needed. We'll start figuring out how to start saving towards those issues. We've now fully wrapped up the capital plan, the capital projects, and are seeing what that impact is on the actual day-to-day costs of the various the sewer and the water systems and how much those cost to actually operate. And so we're also engaging with a company to help us sort out, how to rethink and how to, maybe not rethink, but how to adjust these rates to make sure that we're kind of covering our costs, being able to project forward and cover future costs. And we're also in the midst of rewriting our sewer law to adjust costs primarily for commercial buildings, which has been a bit of a wild west, and we're going to kind of make that make more sense. So there are some adjustments coming. I can't really say to what extent, but we're hoping to keep them manageable. If they were, for some reason, a large increase, we would almost certainly look at phasing that in over a period of time to make that adjustment an easier one to have.
Any thoughts on adjusting the rate structure so that the yearly price might go down for people with limited incomes, but then a sliding scale of usage might kick in to encourage
Water conservation.
water conservation, because every gallon you have to deal with has got a cost to it.
Yeah, it's a great question. I have not myself dug into this just yet, and I think I'm waiting to see what we hear as a suggestion, but that's definitely caught my eye. Yeah, as you'll see here, initially it was more for additional 100,000 and it's now less. Part of this weird, interesting number changes is that we also went from quarterly billing to every other month billing, and so the thing shifted then, and I wasn't there for that, so I'm not entirely clear what the decision of where to spend that balance between additional dollars per gallon and the flat rate. So I definitely think that's part of the conversation, but haven't yet dug into it to really get a good sense.
Just to touch on that very quickly, one of the issues we have with coming up with billing rates is that water and sewer billing, because they're user fee paid, can never be supported by property taxes. So we have to be very careful that we are actually recouping costs. So if we rely too heavily on the variable piece, which would be the usage, then we put ourselves in the position of, in a year where for some reason usage is down by 10%, that we could be under significantly. So we would either have to, in that situation, reserve or come up with a reserving plan that was fairly aggressive. But of course, the opposite end of this spectrum doesn't work either. If we just don't use a usage amount and just flat fee everything, then that becomes onerous as well. So there's a bit of a balance in there.
Just to add to that, an approach we've taken with the fire is to try and sort through the budget to some degree and look at what is that fixed cost and what is that variable cost, and maybe apply that approach here as well. So I'm definitely interested in looking into it. This is the first time I'm going to go through water and sewer billing changes, and I'm curious to kind of, I'll have a chat with Deb and then kind of think through it as well. So, yeah.
I had one question. I'd like to know for sure that the reserves for water and sewer continue to build. Because the one thing that I learned is we went almost 50 years without planning for anything falling apart, which is why this was so significant. If we don't pay for the reserves now, we will go through the exact same thing within the next 20 years.
Yeah, definitely reserve savings is key to my mind. That was a lot of the work that I did with the fire department and trying to make that make sense. And we're engaging with our engineering firm again. I have a draft of a water and sewer kind of capital plan management approach that I just received last week that I'm going to look through. But that has a kind of year by year, what do we want to spend, and you're looking 10 years out, there's $100,000 in there for water main replacement or something. And if we can think through that, then we can save up for it and make sure. And I appreciate the work that you've done, because it is in a very good spot right now, and I intend to keep it that way for sure.
Thank you, Jeff.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I know in the past there's been a big problem with water intrusion stormwater intrusion into the sewer system. Is that still a problem? Have you identified that?
Yes, yep. Actually, we just had a meeting last week or earlier this week with our engineering firm around that. So that work continues. We have identified about half of what we're seeing, not pinpoint identified, but we have a general sense of there's an issue over by Ovals. In part, we're going to wait and see on that in the hopes that a lot of the work that INHS is lined up to do will hopefully improve that situation. We know that there's a potential issue up on East Seneca Road, possibly going out as far as the Legion out there, because that's all kind of connected through there, and a couple other places. So we do have some grant money to do an engineering study to kind of keep moving this. It really will probably just be a continuous project. Occasionally we're going to get lucky and find some smoking guns. It feels like more and more of it's going to be a lot of little issues. So we'll continue working through smoke testing, where we can put smoke into the sewer system and see where it comes out, and see if we find issues that is coming out in places we didn't expect. We'll continue televising some of those lines to get an actual visual on the situation under the ground and what's missing, what needs replacement. A lot of that is going into that capital plan I was talking about, and that engineering study firm is to create a plan that we should then go address. That's what the grant is for, and so we'll have to present that plan back to the state to say, here's what we've studied, here's what we've found, and here's what we recommend addressing, and then we'll have that conversation of what can the DPW take on, what do we need to go out and get grant funding for. So it just kind of continues to be an ongoing approach. I would love nothing more than if there was a clear, we found the problem and we've solved it, but in really high water events, we've seen the sewer system take, what, 5, 6 times kind of what it's scheduled for and what it typically sees. And it might even be more than that. At that point, we kind of stop being able to track it because our flow meters are only expecting so much to come through there. So there's a lot that comes through, and it's just going to be an ongoing project to work through that.
Just to add a piece of color to that, in a high rain event, we're seeing about between 1 and 1.25 million gallons a day equivalent flowing through our sewer system from stormwater. Somewhere between 20 and 25% of that has been identified as coming from the former Alvels property. So the fact that there's a new ownership who is committed to improving that infrastructure piece is significant, because we certainly would not have been able to rely on that problem being fixed prior to INHS taking ownership of it. So that'll make a big difference, and then we continue to identify the other areas, much of which is on private property, but we'll to cross it off the list one place at a time.
So just wanted to say, I like a lot of the discussion here, but thank you so much for the focus on it. It's so important. I like what Rick Darfler brought up about water usage, that kind of thing, and I don't know how you can work that out. And thank you to Deb for working on this, and thank you, Ben, for working on it. It's so important, so important.
I just wanted to say, as a new homeowner in Trumansburg Village, I came up across what's the difference between stormwater, what's the difference between that and the sanitary sewer, and that they're different systems. Because it wasn't clear where my house was discharging water that was not gray water or in sanitary sewer water. And I want to thank Tom Myers and Dustin and the DPW for doing the work that they're doing to, make this clear so that we can take care of the situation, because they were great to work with, and I couldn't speak more highly of them. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Dave?
For stormwater management, how big a problem is it that we're not able to work with Seneca County? Is there some kind of problem that just won't get fixed?
This is a great question. I know Roy has a lot to say about it. I think it's going to become an important piece, and I don't know as if we can't work with them, but it certainly wouldn't be easy. But there is a large concern that a good amount of water, especially when you talk about East Seneca Road, is going to be if you look at the topographical maps, it's coming from Seneca County. So there's a lot to be discussed there, and I don't know if Roy wants to say more, but this is part of our thinking with working with the town, where we do have a good working relationship. Let's at least start there on some of those shared borders. But it might become an issue where we have to talk to Covert or Seneca County to try and address some of those other issues as well.
Yeah, I don't want to presuppose that it's a difficult thing to work with Seneca County or the town of Covert. I think the issue is more one of private property and age of infrastructure. So when you walk, if you walk down Seneca Road towards, say, Washington Street, and kind of look, if the Legion is on your left, and you kind of visually kind of imagine there's the Legion, the doctor's office, and the church. If we go back 50 years and none of that was there, most of the farm drainage was run downhill, which is towards us. So we've got a lot of very old drainage systems which are essentially running into the village. And then as development has occurred, small development though it might be, that has needed its own drainage, which further sends water south. And so property owners along Seneca Road in the village are seeing a lot of that drainage run into their backyards and their retention ponds and then overflow. So it becomes a much larger, it's not like we can send water back uphill towards Seneca County. It's more of how do we address aging, clogged, or insufficient infrastructure there? Who's going to pay for it always ends up becoming kind of the final determinant of that. Is the town of Covert going to be willing to cough up money to help with some of that? I'll leave that question open. Seneca County probably would be willing to help in some form or fashion if a plan was developed. So we'll take that one step at a time, depending who happens to be on the Culver Town Board at that time.
Thank you.
All right.
So I think, oh, excuse me. Wow, that is very strange to hear your voice echoing back at you. So I'm gonna be as quick as I can through all of this. I listed a fair number of things. Can everyone read the slide? I don't want to get trapped in sort of reading those off to you. But I think as you can see in terms of environment and sustainability initiatives, I think it's worth, first of all, shouting out Ben Darfler again. His work on this over the last couple years has been really incredible, and it's been nice for me to sort of start and take over where he left off. Before Ben was also Rachel Kennedy, who started, at least in my experience on the board, who sort of kicked off all of these initiatives. So I know she's not here right now, but hopefully she's watching somewhere, so thank you, Rachel. So from there, I think over the last couple years, and what Ben has really been successful at doing has been infrastructure and building upgrades. So we have a lot of, we have heat pumps in the village hall, we have additional insulation and more tight seals on the building envelope. We also, and Keith has taken a lot of this on, we've also changed the LED streetlights in the village, which changes a lot of our carbon footprint in terms of village-wide infrastructure. So a lot of those concrete plans have been implemented, so far immensely successful, although the streetlights haven't been completely finished yet. We still have the decorative streetlights along Main Street to complete. But where I've taken over, I think over the last couple of years, and what I'd like to, or the last year, excuse me, what I'd like to update all of you on is really, my perspective is somewhat different. I see things, I think maybe a little bit more from an organizational systems perspective maybe. So what I've been focusing on is CCA, which is Community Choice Aggregation. Is anyone here familiar with that concept or that idea? So this is a program that's been started at the county level, and Roden and I have participated in some working group sessions on this, but the idea is that all of our electricity in the village, for all of us, is supplied through NYSEG lines, NYSEG infrastructure, and generally the generation of that energy comes from, not always coal, but it comes from a mix of different power sources. CCA would allow the village or other municipalities in the county to change the default source of that energy. So rather than coming from, NYSEG's chosen sources, we could direct that to, say, come from solar whenever possible. Things like that at the community scale. Now, it wouldn't prevent all of you from opting out of that. If you would prefer to use coal or natural gas sources, you have that option, but the idea is that it would allow us to change the default. So that's something that we've been working with the other county municipalities on. It's also worth pointing out and thanking Rod Howe from the town of Ithaca, who has really taken the lead on that project. So that's something that I think is really exciting. I want to bring it up now because that's a long-term project, and hopefully over the next 1 or 2 years will be coming to fruition. As part of that, there will be a sort of huge communications push, which is required as part of the state law to implement that program. So be on the lookout for that. There is hopefully nothing that you need to do. Like I said, you would change the default of your energy supply. But it's one of those things that I think becomes a sort of, I don't know, it feels very dramatic when it happens. So I'm hoping with some advanced warning and an awareness of what goes into that it will feel like less of a drastic switch. The other thing that I've been working on a little bit now, and hopefully will be implemented in the next few months, is a stretch code, which is an update to the New York State Fire Code. And in the village, this is actually, again, this is sort of, I view it as a lever by which we can change community engagement with the environment, essentially. But this will update the code that Tom enforces, especially on new buildings. So it will do things like require infrastructure that will enable putting in solar or putting in electric cars. And a lot of this is really focused on new construction and will have a fairly minor impact on people who already own houses or already have well, people who already own houses in the village. But again, it's sort of a lever on how we can move forward. So those are the two I wanted to highlight. There's also a number of other things that hopefully we will have a sort of energy and usage dashboard that will go live on the website in the coming months, and how much we incorporate into that is not yet decided. This is actually another thing that Ben Darford has been working on that we sort of need to pick up and go live with, hopefully an interactive dashboard of some kind, so you can look at how much energy we use as a village government and as a community. And then one last thing that I want to touch on quickly is that it has been suggested to me by Rick Darfler, and a number of other people that we should have a sustainability committee in the village. And I think, first of all, if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to me. But I think I wanted to explain sort of our current operating strategy, which is, as I mentioned, Rachel and then Ben and now me have a sort of, we've taken on kind of a lead sustainability role on a rotating basis. And the theory behind that is that we can create the sort of institutional knowledge and organizational support by building that into our board. Whereas a committee tends to be a little bit more transient and a little bit more cumbersome. That said, that is by no means a settled situation. So if you have thoughts or recommendations, I would love to hear them. And I'll leave it there, but if you see anything here that is particularly interesting to you, feel free to ask questions or reach out afterwards.
Could you just say what CEC and CSC are?
Oh yeah, sorry, there's a lot of acronyms. So CEC is Clean Energy Communities. This is a NYSERDA program that essentially provides institutional support and some minor grant funding for various sustainability initiatives. They also, so grant funding, hopefully we'll get about 15 to 20,000 in grant funding through that program this year. And that's basically a recognition of, well, for instance, so the stretch code, if we adopt the stretch code, we get, I think, 1,200 points in their program, and it sort of snowballs that way. So it's really, it's a NYSERDA program that is aimed at sort of leveraging these different motivators for municipal government. Climate Smart Communities is CSC. That is a DEC program that's very similar, and there's different rankings. There's bronze and silver and gold and that kind of thing, but a very similar program. CCA is community choice aggregation, which I already mentioned. CO2 is carbon dioxide.
Can you say that out loud, please? Louder for me?
CO2 is carbon dioxide.
Thank you.
Yeah. And NOx is nitrous oxide.
And O2.
Oh, did I do the wrong one? Oh boy. See?
Oh boy.
Good thing Tom's here. Yeah.
457 pounds per what unit time?
Oh, it's year.
Okay.
That's yearly, and actually, if you look at the village website, there is a document that has those numbers, and then they're annualized, and then there's also a total number, so carbon sequestered in trees in the village at any given time, total. So it's a pretty interesting thing. If you look up the Street Tree Advisory Committee subpage on our website, there's a document there that's pretty cool. Yeah.
I wonder if there's a way to pull any of the NYSERDA data about Empower grants that are within the village of Trumansburg, so the work is being done to upgrade that insulation in someone's phone. That's public information. At least you would have a sense of what was being insulated that wasn't before, or whatever.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, and thank you for bringing that up, because that sort of triggers a memory, which is one of the things that we've worked on that I also had meant to mention, is community campaigns aimed at encouraging community solar in the village. So this is a joint campaign that we ran with the town. And I actually, Deb or Gordon, you remember, but I think I brought this up maybe 5 or 6 years ago. We ran a similar campaign. But essentially, community solar is similar to the community choice aggregation that I just described, but it allows you on an individual level to opt into solar-provided energy. And I won't go into the details. There's a page on our website, so if you go to the village website and just search for solar, you'll see there's a lot of information. You can also sign up and let the village know. If you tell us that you have joined a community solar program, we then get points through the CEC program and can get access to some grant money. So it's kind of a win-win in that regard.
I have a question. Yeah. Ben, what about tree planting in the village? When trees come down, which they do quite frequently, does the village have any resources for helping a person plant a tree in their yard, or what's going on there?
So that is a great question and something that is on my mind sort of continuously. At this point, our tree program has focused on mitigating safety concerns. So we started, I think Roden dug up an old inventory, is that 4 years ago? 3 years? Anyway, a couple of years ago.
Inventory's older than that.
Oh, the inventory, yeah, is from maybe the mid-90s? Mid-2000s? But in any case, Roden pulled up an old inventory that showed, it was terrifying, to be frank about it. It was old trees that were rated as dangerous in this inventory that had not been taken care of by the village or by homeowners or by anyone. So we sort of started this committee from a frame of reference of risk mitigation. And it's been now a couple years, we have taken out a lot of the trees or caused to be taken out. A lot of trees that were, a lot of those terrifying trees. So we are now starting to debate and consider how we sort of transition into more of a community forest maintenance plan, which would hopefully involve a lot of tree planting. But as a committee, we have, I think as committee members, we have participated in tree planting, through different things, through, I think it was the Rotary who planted last year for Arbor Day at the fairgrounds. We coordinated with Cornell to plant several oak trees throughout the village. I don't know if you noticed across from the farmer's market, there's that pull up there. So there's 3 new oak trees there. So we have done some, but it's not at this point a concerted strategic plan, although I hope it will become that.
I'd just like to go back to your mentioning of letting you know if you're on solar or not.
Yeah.
I've been on solar through that program probably several years, but I never notified anybody. It might be to your benefit, even maybe on the water bill, say, hey, if you have solar, let us know, so that you can get those points that you're looking for.
Yes. So thank you for that. There is a form on our website that I'll just email you the link. But for anyone else, if you go to our website and you search solar, you'll see a project that is community solar, and there is a form, a Google form there that if you could fill that out and let us know, that would be great. That's the only way that we can get sort of credit, so to speak, for your journey. Yeah.
Does it matter if you're commercial or residential?
No. So I believe actually that there is additional points. I haven't looked into the commercial program, but either way, it will count for this program. Sorry, Peter, you were.
Yeah, a street light comment. The street light in front of my house and many houses is great on the street, but it projects 30 feet into the yard, my yard. I noticed walking the dog around at night, the facade of many houses is quite bright, which means that the light is going into the rooms in the house. So is there a solution? Is there a way to dial down the street lights? Or at least some particular street lights?
I'll let Ben take this one.
I've been in my house 44 years. This is the first year that it's hard to see the stars at night, blah, blah, blah.
So we just got set up with the program for the new street lights. I don't know if you noticed the difference, but we decreased the what do you call that? The light. It went from 100 to 85%, and we've been kind of waiting on input from people on whether that is still too bright.
It is actually better.
Okay, so we have dimmed them. We can dim now each of those lights, I believe, individually. So if you come to me and say, mine's shining in my bedroom window really bright, can you dim it to 65% and try it? It's an app right on my phone now that I can go in.
Oh, really?
And I can, dim
You're
each
in the office
individual
on
light.
Monday?
Yeah. So, yeah, we have been
very good
working on that. The program was just implemented 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Maybe 3. I've lost track of time. With
This is the DPW at work.
So, yeah, that's definitely we can
I'm glad to hear that.
progress.
They're shockingly bright on it.
Yeah.
Lumen.
That's, yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Yes. We did it all the time. Once we took over the program from 100 days.
So I will be, well,
With
let's us
understanding
finish up this discussion.
that individual lights.
When I was part of the LED lights, that was the most exciting part for me was the smart app control of all the lights. And when I heard that, I said, I can't wait to
I
let
noticed
Dusty
you all had
be
it
the
on
lord
your
of the lights in Village of Trumansburg and just play with everyone. I believe there's a Twilight Zone episode around that, The Monsters of Maple Street, where they just turn all the lights off, so hopefully Dusty doesn't go that far. Thank you all for coming. First of all, I know with COVID and the cold and everything, it's not always exciting to gather, but you gave Jessica and I an opportunity to break out our plaid blazers and get out of the sweatpants and t-shirts that we all work in now, so thank you very much for that. Speaking of Dusty, I don't know if you noticed, but we had some snow over the last 48 hours. He could probably be catching up on sleep right now, but he's here with us, so thank you for that, Dusty. And I also want to take a quick second, because I don't think any of them are really good at taking a bow, but this is my third or so year on this board, and I know other people who serve in other governments, both regionally and around the country, and I just want to, myself excluded, want to recognize the talent on our village board, because the time that they put in, the thought they put into it, the amount of care they have for the village, and really the innovation and passion they have to look at things differently and run lots of data and collaborate with state officials and other county officials and other counties. I think I haven't lived here as long as a lot of you, but I find it hard to believe there's, and I would include Deb in that because I served with her too. There's just a lot of passion and energy and talent in these individuals, and it's really, I'm proud to be with them. So just wanted to recognize that. So now that I have you all warmed up, let's talk law enforcement. So I am the police commissioner, which doesn't get me out of tickets or anything like that. It just allows me to work side by side with the chief on things like budget and other programs. So I'm going to give you an update on a number of things. First, full-time officer position. So a couple years ago, probably at the State of the Village, we talked about adding 2 full-time officers. And the reason behind that was to have more familiarity with the officers, so that you would see basically the same 2 people on duty most of the time. And the beautiful thing was they both were local, which is always great with your police department. For most of the last year and a half, we've only had 1 full-time officer. So we are continuing to look for another full-time officer. We have someone that we think might fit the bill, hopefully, coming up soon. But just to highlight the kind of the difficulty of finding people, most of our department is part-timers who either work at other municipalities or are retired and just are picking up a few hours for us. To get a full-time officer, kind of the pool of people we're looking at is only about 17 people who took the most recent police exam. That's not even the number who passed the exam. We don't know that number yet, but 17 spread across the whole county, and other people looking for police officers. It's not always easy to get those people that then pass the exam and go through the academy and everything to end up in Trumansburg. So there certainly are challenges there, like every other sector right now in terms of hiring. There are challenges, but we're working on it. Speed enforcement, certainly, I know many of you live on streets where you don't like how fast people go. We are constantly trying to monitor streets over the summer and into the early fall. There was a big focus on Halsey Street. We've also tried to keep an eye on Bradley Street. Main Street in general there's always a lot of speed, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But no, it is something that we take seriously, that we're trying to pay attention to. You know, it's hard to catch everybody in the act. We've done things like put out the speed signs that record speeds, and that encourages people also to slow down. So we have data on that. The good news is, you know, 96% of people are generally in compliance, but some of those 4%ers are problematic. It only takes one person to be out of control to cause a problem. So we take it very seriously, and we're continuing to look at that. Speaking of Main Street, I spend a lot of time at Gimme Coffee, a lot of time at Gimme Coffee, and to a lesser degree, Garrett's. Is that my bell? Am I talking? I'm just trying to get through this before you finish that blanket, Mrs. Darford. That's been my goal here, is do not let you finish that Afghan before I'm done with my update. That would be a bad sign. Main Street, we know that, you know, gets a lot of truck traffic, and even non-trucks go too fast. TCAT recently reached out to Chief Nelson and the village because their drivers have expressed concern about the blindness of our crosswalks and people stepping out in the crosswalks and not being able to be seen, especially right there in front of Gimme in the mini village. So they actually did a study for us, and their recommendations that came back were to remove, I believe, a total of 3 parking spots in that area to make the crosswalk more visible. Now, sounds good, not as slam dunk of an issue as you might think. Certainly we have local business owners that already think parking is a premium on Main Street, and giving up those spots is something that's honestly been debated for a long time. I requested a Main Street study with the State Department of Transportation about 2.5 years ago. It's still on their plate, still on their to-do list, I guess. But that was Andy's New York, maybe things will change. But so we've looked at Main Street for quite a while now, and so we're going to continue to look at that issue. Actually, I'm going to bring that study before the board at our next meeting. There's a little preview that entices you to come by. We'll talk about that at the next board meeting, but you know, we're always looking for feedback. If you have feedback with regards to Main Street, and you know, it's a tough situation because it's a state road that we can't. Typically, the state's not going to let us go below 30 miles per hour, so we're looking for solutions to try to make it safer. Call report, so we're still seeing about 2,500 calls for the year, for this past year. From 20 to 21, we did see about a 17% increase in responding to calls outside the village, so assisting with calls. I think, if Rorden wants to talk about this, later on. Certainly there is, and I can kind of talk a little bit about it when I do my lease update. Everyone's probably aware of a lot of the discussions and debate that's happening in the city of Ithaca with regards to law enforcement. So we are very mindful that there could be situations in the future that pull us more out of the village borders, and we're trying to, basically plan for that, but also collaborate regionally and locally and try to make sure that, we're able to just focus on the village and don't get stretched too thin. Rorden likes to reflect on, I think it was this past summer, there was a situation where there was so much help needed in the city. Our one police car was basically the only thing between Ithaca and Geneva in terms of being able to respond to something. So we don't want those situations to become habit. And so there's been actually, I'll update this in the reform section to be continued. We have and continue to pursue grants for our department. So Chief is very active with looking for state money to help support some of our budgetary items. Grants that we've received have gone towards things like speed and DWI enforcement and crosswalk education. So if you've been on Main Street, you may have seen over the summer or in fall our officers handing out material about crosswalk safety and how to cross streets in an appropriate manner so that you're visible. And we also use grant money to purchase a live scan machine, which I won't go into the details of that because it might not be that exciting, but this helps with processing of things like fingerprints and background checks, And believe it or not, before we were able to get this device, we would actually have to kind of hand carry a lot of documents across the lake to like the county sheriff's office, which that's time we'd rather have our officers in Trumansburg and not on the road transporting documents like a courier service. So this machine will save a ton of time and work hours on being able to just transmit these things electronically. And the Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts, they came by the department recently. You may have seen it on Facebook. I highlight this just as a example of ongoing attempts to be engaged with the community and have our department out on the streets doing things, working with the community. You know, it's been hard to do these things in the COVID era. I think we're officially at an era now. I don't know how many years it takes to reach an era, but it feels like we're there. So the Girl Scouts came by. They get to pick, I believe, 5 badges to focus on in a year. And one of the badges they wanted to, they picked this year was the detective badge. So they came by the department, and our officers, Rumsey and Covert, took them through a lot of background about policing, you know, how the call system works, how they write reports, and a general education about policing. Then they actually staged, or they didn't stage it, that would, I don't want to make it sound like there was a recreation of any kind, but they put some props out to show that a burglary had taken place, and then they swore in the Girl Scouts, and then the Girl Scouts got to solve the crime. So really great feedback from the Girl Scouts and the community on that part. We put it out on Facebook, and people were really happy to see that we were doing those kind of things. So we will continue to try to find more community engagement types initiatives like that as we are able to gather more effectively and safely. Reform. So real quickly, you may remember the last State of the Village at the farmers market. I talked about kind of more details about the reform plan that we had submitted to the state. And so this is just kind of a quick update on some of the things that we've been following through on. Trainings. Chief is looking to introduce new and different types of trainings for the department and making them mandatory. You know, there's always been this kind of, I think, optional available trainings if people want to get them, but Chief is making it more a policy with the staff. Body cameras, we deployed new body cameras, I think in May, June-ish. They are not only great cameras, but they also include software that makes it much easier to submit body camera footage to the district attorney's office, and that takes away a lot of potential, you know, doing things with footage and stuff like that. It's just a very easy process that keeps it out of less hands, which helps with, you know, maintaining good integrity with the footage. I will say I have watched some body cam footage of our officers over the past year, and honestly have been very happy and proud with how they've conducted themselves. There have been situations where, you know, even in our village, there's been body camera images dealing with mental health individuals who, if I was in an officer's position, I would have been much more nervous than they were. And they were extremely professional and kind to everybody that they've worked with. So I know this is an ongoing discussion topic nationally and locally, but I can say with confidence that you should be proud of our department and the leadership of our chief. Not everybody has it, but we do, and he is very committed to still getting better and putting in more processes that ensure that our department is good well beyond his tenure. So I wanted to plug the chief on that.
Amen.
Steps towards, thank you, sir. So part of the reform is steps towards accreditation, and this is a kind of a long, very detailed process that will not happen overnight by any stretch. But some of the things we've been doing to try to get there is equipment upgrades and upgrades within the office. LiveScan is one of those things that you've heard about. And one of the some of the most common feedback I think we got during the reform process from residents who were part of the committees was an interest in knowing who we stopped instead of in terms of demographic data. Historically, we have not collected that. And there's now a process coming together at the county level where there's a system being developed to essentially capture that in traffic stops, so that we will have more of a holistic view of any and all trends that we might not like to see in terms of who's getting stopped. And so that is coming together at the county level, and our chief has been part of that process, and it's early going now. And LEAPS, which is our Law Enforcement and Public Safety Committee that kind of spun out of the reform discussions. First, I'll say we're constantly looking for people who want to be involved in this committee. It's a very low lift. It's not something that you have to have 100% perfect attendance for. We've been meeting quarterly, but we think we're going to start increasing that frequency. So we started with, about this many people to talk reform process, and then we went into then we launched the LEAPS committee, and we got down to about this much at the first meeting, and then about this much at the second meeting. So if you're interested, or you know people that are interested in learning more about not just our police department, but a general approach to public safety, everything from what our call types are to our call volume and how we respond and how you'd like to see us respond, but also anything public safety minded. We had a long conversation at the last meeting about crosswalk safety. So that anything that's public safety related is a topic that we tackle and will continue to tackle. And that's even people feeling safe in attending meetings like this, or do people feel comfortable expressing their opinion at board meetings, or even running for local office? Like, how do we make sure everyone in the community feels like they can publicly have their voice heard without being intimidated? So it's a wide range of topics that we try to tackle. Right now we're at about 6 members within the local community. Again, those are some of the issues that we discussed. And long-term goals, we're starting to talk about what are the long-term goals of the committee in terms of what are the action items that the community members on the committee can actually take to be actually involved and to see the time that they're putting into the committee reflected in the community. So that's the kind of stuff we're going after right now. And again, if you or know anyone who wanted to be a part of that, please let us know. Mrs. Darfler's on the committee. I don't know if she wants to share anything she's learned or working on it. She's back. My timer has started again.
By the time we're safe here, this is going to be a really big action.
Yeah. But she might, if you want to talk to her, she might have opinions on things she's learned and what she's getting out of the committee and why you should join her and us. Deb, do you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. That's about it for me. Is there any questions on any of those 3 kind of topics?
Question.
Yes.
When does the 6 members of a local community meet to discuss these issues of public safety and all the things that are surrounding it? Is it a public meeting? Is it at the village hall? Is it here at the fire station?
We met at Little Venice, and then we met at the firehouse. We went to the village hall. We're trying to keep it not secret and not, to be out more in the community.
Okay.
But it's so new now that we're really trying to walk through it. But we don't want it to be, we're sequestered back in the village hall. We want it to be more public so people feel comfortable coming in. We haven't announced, is there now? Is it on the website? I think we were going to.
The committee's on the website, yeah. I think the next meeting is going to be in March.
So I don't know how people, actually at this time, I don't know how people would know when and where we're meeting. I think it's word of mouth. If you were interested in talk to me and talk to Keith, we haven't really figured out how to spread the word. We're very new.
There's some real significant safety issues in this village with the police, with high-speed trucks and vehicles coming down through the middle of the village doing 45 and 50 miles an hour in the center of the village. There's some real interesting issues. I'd like to personally be able to give tickets to people.
Well, join the committee, we'll give you a ticket book and you can.
Well, I can do that as a former military police officer up for captain when I got out of the reserves. But I'd like to issue tickets to people that go through the stop sign on the corner of Halsey, which they do every single morning between 7 o'clock and 8:30 going to the school. But I'd like to come and listen to the 6 members and interact with them. Can you post that? When you're going to meet? Can it be in the paper? Can you call people? Or?
The answer is no. You can come. I will send you the invitation. One of the things that came up in the police reform discussion was several individuals expressed concern on behalf of themselves and others about an apparent sense in the community from some members that they don't feel safe approaching village leadership or participating in these conversations. So one of my purposes with LEAPS when I formed it was that we are not hiding the meetings, but we're not opening them to the public. I want them to feel like a small, informal group where participants will not feel in any way uncomfortable or threatened by their participation. Trying to open up the feeling of welcomeness for folks who may not otherwise show up at a village meeting and raise their hand and say, I've got a problem with you. So yes, by all means, if you know of someone or yourself who would like to come to one of these meetings, please let us know so that we can specifically invite you. I will not be publishing the dates or times or saying, come one, come all, because that defeats the purpose of the feeling of safety and familiarity that we're trying to achieve, given some of the topics of conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add, part of the committee is we're also willing to just have face-to-face discussions about anything law enforcement related. So we actually have kind of an ongoing shared document online where people can submit articles in the news that they've seen about different departments or different events across the country. And it gives us an opportunity to kind of talk about those from the local perspective, but also just as people who want to continue to see public safety improved and, kind of give the chief's opinion on that as someone that's been a state trooper and now a chief of police. So it's a good place to have a friendly dialogue on, some of these really intense issues that have come to the forefront over the last few years especially. So to Roar's point, we're trying to create a space where everyone feels comfortable talking honestly about all that stuff. And again, we're happy to have more of you join us at any time.
And I'll just add to that, the phrase public safety tends to lead us to think about law enforcement, but it's actually a very broad phrase. And someone who shall remain nameless, but their initials are Jules Bergevin, suggested to me once that a mayor's kitchen table committee, is that what you called it? That's some form of informal ability to meet and discuss any issue that comes to a resident's mind, village related, would be helpful. I actually see this as a vehicle for that. If it's something, if there's an issue that affects a village resident, and let's face it, it takes a certain amount of either some combination of fear, anger, or desperation to get you to come to a village board meeting and raise your hand during public comment period when it's being live streamed on YouTube and recorded to say, I've got an issue, which potentially could be very personal. You certainly can reach out to any board member via email. You can call us. But to be able to structure something where people can feel a little bit more comfortable bringing a concern that isn't going to have someone criticize you on social media immediately. I like the idea of having that available, and I think LEAPS can be that, although the focus initially is law enforcement and will continue to be law enforcement related. I think any of these other topics are fair game for anyone who may have that interest or need.
Any other questions? And I will look into deputizing Mr. Bergevin. Get him a ticket pad so he can go to work.
You're getting to start.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for everyone who's still here. 11:02, game on. We had a lot of great accolades for the fire department already, so I don't want to over trumpet that horn, so I'm not sure that's possible. They do such a lot for our community. Thanks, Jules, for that too. And also our friend in the back, Tom, thank you. So anyway, so the fire department, its year runs April to March. So we have 340 calls year to date from April to March, which represents 3,600 in-service hours. And on top of all of that, they also offer event support, not only for events that might happen in the village, like Winterfest, and just being aware of the other things, but they also have sort of a contract based on the not a contract, but the fairgrounds, when you do an event there, depending on the size of your event, it requires that there are first responders there, including the fire department. So a tremendous amount that happens there, and recognizing that the department, with Chief Matt Taylor, is this building and equipment and then how things happen on scene, right? But the company is the labor that comprises what happens for the fire department, right? Other than the chief, does that make sense? Okay, so the fire company is a non-for-profit. It's a company of men and women, and we actually have really great representation and a fair amount of diversity for a village of 1,800. All shapes, sizes, colors, and varieties. And they have engaged in school visits, the Letters to Santa program, which I think we're all aware of, which included 4 Santa Claus or 7 Santa Claus this year, and some help from Mecklenburg. It was a really successful program, which also speaks to this community support for that program. And so on top of 3,600 in-service hours and school visits and organizing the Letters to Santa and then being present at Winterfest, including bringing the fire truck down. They are also fundraising for their own, for rescue tools, because the fire company can also own some assets. The department has assets, that's the village. The fire company can have things that they want to replace. It's commonly thought of as the Jaws of Life, though that's a trade name, but that sort of equipment. And so there's going to be a chicken barbecue that they're doing for Super Bowl Sunday, and they've done other things, including when we asked, would you please do a barbecue at our State of the Village, the farmers market last year. So just really seeing how much they are part of our community, both when you really need them, and I just found this out, they pump out your basement. I'm like, really? Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much for your endless support of the safety and health of this community. So that's fire. Does anyone have any questions about fire department? They have a homepage, they have a website, or Facebook rather. They have a Facebook page, so you really can check in on their activities or engage with them that way. It's a great company of men and women. Dave?
Is there a timeline for the new building, and any thoughts as to what would happen to this building?
So there's lots of thoughts about what would happen to this building, and there's some things available, but we've already identified that there's some restrictions to the actual health of this building. And then a timeline is largely based on funding. It's an $8 million project and would require, the years to construct that. So I can't speak more to that.
Yeah, I mean, if we got a blank check tomorrow, we've already missed 2022 bid and construction season. So we'd be looking at spring of 23 if funding was available today. We're probably, and I'm hopeful, that's a big number, so it's going to have to be federal funding. I'm hopeful that we can have that allocated to us this year. And then we would do engineering and the bid process, and the actual build itself is probably not more than 12 to 18 months time frame. So what happens to this building would be a matter of discussion at that point. The bays are heated. Could potentially be a good facility for another village department. We'd have to think through what the highest and best use of the property would be at that point.
Great, thank you.
So, Gordon, at the beginning, at the outset, brought up the issue of an EMS building, which to date, I think, has been the most prominent topic when we, at these State of the Village meetings, when we talk about EMS. What we usually do is talk about the prospect of a building, the deterioration and breakdown of this building, and the need for new facilities. And one thing that we don't talk enough about, I think, is the EMS department itself and what it does, especially how important it is regionally. And so I wanted to I'm going to try and keep this as brief as I can, because I am cognizant of the time. But I just want to quickly show you all, these are our call numbers for last year. When I started on the board 8 years ago, they were in the mid 700s. I was looking at budgets that stretched back maybe to 2012 or so, and they were in the mid 600s. So this is a number that is trending up at a significant pace. And I haven't included the budget numbers for the department, but our budget numbers have kept pace. We just last year broke the $1 million mark for the department. So we are in, as Roden mentioned, small village, very large department. So these are, hopefully many of you have not required the ambulance, but if you have, you know that when you call, they're there. And they're reliably timely and professional, and the care that they provide is really, it's a mobile emergency room, right? So this is real professional healthcare being delivered to your house at a moment's notice. And it's really an impressive and sort of amazing thing, especially in the context of, again, as Roden mentioned, declining volunteerism in the region, in New York, nationally. EMS for many years and in many places, especially rural America, is driven by volunteer EMTs and paramedics. Fortunately, and this predates me, but fortunately our village board and surrounding boards had sort of the foresight and maybe, the requirement to transition our department into paid staff. And the reason that that's important is that regionally, we are at this point increasingly a model for how to maintain stable EMS services. So as those volunteer fire departments are struggling to have members, and as qualifications and state requirements for EMT and paramedic certifications have increased, our model is starting to look increasingly like a bright spot, or maybe the way that a lot of places will have to move in order to maintain those services. So if you look at this map is our call volume, our call numbers for 2020, and it's slightly adjusted just for privacy's sake, but you can get a sense of where the calls are. So these are our districts. So this is Covert, this is Ulysses. The village is sort of so clouded by calls that you can't even make out the borders, but we're here, and then Hector, and this is the Mecklenburg district. So these are the areas that we contract. You can see the corresponding call numbers there. And these municipalities help pay the EMS budget based on a 3-year rolling average of calls, so we divvy that based on a percentage of calls. But what's interesting is that in 2016-17, Slaterville ambulance closed, which is out here, this red loop, or this red circle. And after that, our calls started to move in here, where you can see now we're responding to calls not regularly, but not infrequently either in the city of Ithaca. Simultaneously, we're responding to more and more calls up here, and even in Montour Falls. So we're covering at this point, our district itself is about 112 square miles, but we respond to an area that's over 300, just over 400 square miles. So in terms of our de facto coverage area, it's huge. And we're talking about the village of Trumansburg taking this on, right? We are a very small municipality, 1,800 people, are in some ways the backbone of healthcare for the entire Between the Lakes region, which is something that I think we as a community should be, immensely proud of. But I think it's also increasingly important that we hold our state, county, and surrounding county representatives accountable for this as a broader issue, right? On the one hand, we should be very proud. On the other hand, we should recognize the absurdity of doing all of this without broader support, right? It is, on its face, a strange circumstance to find ourselves in. So, in recognizing, I think, both the growing nature of our department, but also the tenuous nature of the EMS network as a whole in rural New York, and I mean, it's really a countrywide issue, but especially in rural New York, you can sort of see that we are a model, but we are not unique in the sense that those system and network dynamics are not unique to the village. So one thing that Roden and I have been working on over the past couple years, but has sort of begun to, I think, find some traction now at the state and county level, is really pushing for that recognition that this is a Trumansburg issue, certainly, but really it's a much broader issue that requires state funding. So one thing in particular that I'll just shout out in terms of specific, and Roden, feel free to jump in and talk about this more specifically, but is that what we need, because this is a network problem, right? So you can see that Slaterville is outside of our district, and their closure affected call response times in Romulus, right? So that's crossing 3 districts, that's 2 different counties, also in Schuyler County. So we're talking about a network. Interestingly, we also span 2 different regional EMS areas. So we're just at the intersection of all of these strange jurisdictional boundaries, and obviously the network has no respect for those jurisdictional boundaries. So it becomes pretty immediately and pretty apparently a state issue. But so Roden, I think, has put a tremendous amount of effort and had really a shocking amount of success, I think, if you think about the difficulty navigating state politics, policies. I mean, it's shocking, I think, on some level, the amount of success that's happened. But recently has pushed for and had written a bill that would create a sort of CHIP-style funding apparatus for rural EMS. How that comes to fruition is, anyone's guess, but it really is at this point, you'll notice that our new governor recognized in her State of the State address that EMS issues are of paramount importance. She included them, I think, not exactly equal to other healthcare issues in the state, but certainly on the same level, which is really it's an inspiring amount of progress, and we hope to see it continue. I think I'll let Roden talk a little bit more about that, but I think it's important for all of you to know what a critical role we play regionally in this system. And I think not just us, but also our contracting municipalities, who have been really just amazing partners in terms of keeping this department afloat and making sure that this service is available as we move forward. So I'll end there. Happy to let Roden talk a little bit and take questions after.
Yeah, I had never anticipated that EMS would become my personal white whale. Sometimes it does feel like tilting at windmills, but I think this map, this call map, so each of those dots is a geolocation pin for a call that we responded to. It's been offset slightly, so if you got a hold of the map, you wouldn't be able to figure out the actual address, but it's close enough. This map kind of changed my life when I realized that if Trumansburg EMS didn't exist, there is no substitute for those calls. There's no one to take those calls. 15 years ago, Bangs was responding to the village of Trumansburg 2 or 3 times a week because we had some staffing issues at the time. 15 years later, 2022, we are running standby backup for Bangs, staging an ambulance at the hospital at least twice a week. Now this leads back to something Keith mentioned earlier with respect to the reimagining police and all of the law enforcement proposed changes, by the way of which all of the law enforcement agencies outside of the city of Ithaca and the Tompkins County Sheriff's Office were not included in any of the county or the city's conversation. That has shifted slightly. The folks who are in charge of implementing those recommendations have realized that that was a mistake and are now including us in conversations going forward, and I'm very appreciative of that. But one of the things that has come out of the law enforcement piece of the conversation is an emphasis, correctly I believe, in moving certain types of calls which have fallen to law enforcement over the last 20 years, trying to move some of those types of calls back into the mental health system. which, while a correct move, nevertheless further strains the mental health system, which is the healthcare system. When we start talking about Albany, there continues to be, although we're making inroads, there continues to be an outdated thought among our legislators, many of them, that EMS and ambulance is a first response function of counties and/or fire departments. And what I have begun to push for them to recognize is that EMS is healthcare. And in a, not to wax overly political today, but in a deep blue state that believes that healthcare is a human right and we should have healthcare for all, if you don't acknowledge that EMS is healthcare, you are not a serious human being when you say healthcare for all. And I'm pleased that that has begun to resonate slightly. I mentioned her already, but Assemblymember Tellis has become extremely helpful on this issue. She believes that healthcare, that EMS is in fact healthcare. She understands the tenuous nature, after several conversations with her, she understands the tenuous nature of this ambulance infrastructure and interconnected network. And I did draft the only time I've ever done it, and hopefully the only time I ever will do it, I did draft a legislative memo that has been converted into a bill. So if you want to talk, Ben, about letter writing campaigns at some point, this bill has been introduced in the Assembly and the Senate. It has already received pushback from some other players in Albany with respect to, we don't want to fund EMS, we want to do other things to try to help ambulance coverage. So it is definitely a long uphill battle that we have ahead of us. But when I look at the map behind me, I see the need for Albany to recognize that if we are going to have emergency health care provided to our residents at the point of most urgent need, we need to make sure ambulances show up. And if a village of Trumansburg, and there are certainly other municipalities around the state that are similar to us, if a village of Trumansburg gets to a point where, heaven forbid, a future village board decides this budget is too big, our coverage is too wide, we're going to close our ambulance department or retract to our borders and build a proverbial wall, then it's cliche to say that if you do X, people will die. But in this case, it's true. And when I became mayor in 2018, I had Tompkins County Emergency Response get me access to an app that lets me see all of the calls as they come in for fire and EMS. And I don't ever want to be in a position where the village is no longer able to respond across, as Ben mentioned, across an imaginary line, a municipal boundary, and we don't get to, the 2-year-old in respiratory distress or the individual who's just had the heart attack or the stroke. If we aren't here, no one else will be. And that's just a fact. And I know Bang's ambulance has looked at the logistics of expanding their operation to the north, and it's just simply not cost effective. If you're a for-profit entity, you can't make money up here, which is the problem. We can't make money up here, so it becomes a taxpayer burden for which state funding is not only appropriate but needed. So that's something that I'm hoping to continue to advocate for and push for. And the reason why we spend time talking about it at these kinds of meetings is it is a very large number. We're heading into budget season this year. I fully expect EMS will be 1.3 to 1.4 million. Our total village budget is only 3 million. So you're looking at 40 to 45% of our entire village budget, not including water and sewer, dedicated to the provision of a service that wouldn't exist if we weren't here, but is stunningly expensive. And it's stunningly expensive because it's healthcare. And healthcare is expensive, and we all realize that. So hopefully that's something that we can continue these conversations, we can continue the push, we can maybe, fingers crossed, make a real difference in how Albany views the service and can, maybe potentially have a positive effect on how the service is rendered statewide for other municipalities who are in a similar situation. And so with that, I will, if there are any EMS related questions, certainly happy to take them. Yeah.
Yeah, so, well, Gordon, thank you, and thank you also, Beth, for showing this information. Will you be letting us have, I mean, I'm jotting some information down about letters to Albany, since I agree EMS is a healthcare issue, how, for us to contribute to that?
Yes, so when we get to the stage, I have to be careful. I follow it closely, but I'm certainly not in committee meetings, in Albany. I have to be careful not to try to do other people's work for them or overstep. But certainly if it comes to a point where our legislators are asking for help, then I will certainly make that very public. Assemblymember Kellis, Senator Helming, Senator Hinchy from the Albany area, they are both huge advocates of doing something to make EMS more sustainable, particularly in rural areas. So they're the three champions of the issue at the moment, and we're hoping to bring others on board. Some of the pushback tends to come from areas that are focusing on trying to resurrect higher levels of volunteer efforts, trying to find ways to get higher reimbursement rates for Medicare and Medicaid, issues that are all good if we can get them, but don't actually address any of the structural issues of providing the service. So, a multi-pronged approach would seem like the way to go, but it's Albany, so who knows?
Yeah.
Ben, did you have a question earlier about the fire and EMS building when I first mentioned it?
You answered it, I just didn't know where it was, and you answered that.
Anything else EMS related?
Okay, so also beginning with E, and also about the health of a community, we have Village Events and Tourism, which was a new committee appointed by the mayor and coordinates with him and also the board ultimately. And so that was born in 2021, affectionately called ETC, because it's the rest, village life, etc. Okay, so in 2021, we were established and then helped facilitate the Rotary Duck Race, which happened at Porch Fest. Perhaps you all got to see it. It was pretty fun. It has been deemed that there wasn't really enough water in June, that new ducks that were shiny might be purchased and kept by the Rotary themselves. And so in 2022, you can expect to come to the duck race at the Village Yard Sale, which I think is May 14th, Tammy. Yahoo! So really fun. And again, this sort of highlights that sometimes events are sponsored by the village and sometimes we just facilitate them happening. So the ETC it doesn't make events, but it's here to help people who want to put one on, get on the village calendar, connect them with grants that might be there, connect them and liaise with other municipalities if they want to do something that might involve another county or the town of Ulysses, things like that. So if you out there in your world are going, oh, our group was just thinking of something, but we could use some assistance and or some publicity, just reach out and you can find us on the village website in the boards and committees, and you can contact us there. I will update the 2022 calendar now that it's February. We also just helped facilitate the Trumansburg Crit, which is the downtown Criterion bicycle races that happen here and come very screamingly up Old Main, actually slower, but screamingly down Washington, up Old Main. It's a mile race. And again, not a village event, but certainly the ETC helped coordinate with the Department of Public Works, with EMS, with police, and alerting the fire company that it was happening. And all of those departments helped give their support. We did, thankfully, and Cynthia Menino, who functioned as chair for the Winterfest committee, we got Winterfest back. Yay! And again, the credit for that comes from, should be given to rather, the Winterfest committee itself, the women that were on that really drove it. The ETC just said, hey, we're working with the mayor and the board, we really want to see this event come back. How can you help move that forward? And so much community support. And there could probably be a whole meeting just about Winterfest and all the people that did it. I would also like to acknowledge that none of these things can really happen without the support of the village staff. So the treasurer who helped, especially with Winterfest, and Tammy is clerk who makes sure things function, and even codes, right? And Tom Myers, all of the people in the offices that help facilitate events come to our community, which is what we want, right? We'd like to, in Maine, we would say, oh, come visit, come visit. Maybe don't move here, but come visit, come visit. So we might want people to move here too, not sure. But anyway, we certainly want them to visit, and we want them to enjoy in a healthy, respectful way that benefits all of us, our natural resources and our downtown corridor. And so part of that, really the ETC word, I think, came because there was the notion of where are we going to put the Taganic Giant, right? And so it sort of maybe came out of that, because what the Taganic Giant, and that was an event that was already, or a concept that was already taken and championed by the Little Giant Committee, right? So they have this asset, and where could it be? And the mayor was on that committee, and then we worked to find a home for it, which is the village, or the Farmers Market Annex. Doesn't have a name other than that at the moment. And you may have seen it as you come in to town across from the Farmers Market, which really led to this other idea of, what about all of our green spaces? What about all of the potential park spaces that we have, which certainly have been highlighted in the current comprehensive plan and the one that was underway, that people really enjoy using our public spaces? And how can we make the most use of them, be cohesive about that use, and also be respectful of the villagers who live near them and all of that? And so we are going to, in 2022, we're going to start a green space team, which is, subcommittee, if you will, of the Events and Tourism Committee, to really sort of look at what we have as village green space, the tiny triangle at the top of Old Main, and also the annex, and also the water tower and beyond, and say, what do we want to do with this system based on everyone's feedback in the comprehensive plan? We want to walk to spaces, we want to have spaces. So they'll be looking at that. You can look for information to be posted about how you might participate in that as the project gets on, and certainly, like the sidewalk project, will require a tremendous amount of community feedback because it's our village. We'll also focus on the 150th celebration. More on that to come. There'll be, I'm sure, an aggregate of events in a short period of time, but then also, as Jordan suggested, other events that could happen throughout the year. And then one thing I'm keen on for sure is leveraging the Tompkins County Chamber of Commerce, because as you may or may not know, the village is a member. So we have the Trumansburg Chamber of Commerce, that's outstanding. And the village is also a member of the Tompkins County Chamber, and they just have really, I don't know if anyone sees their updates or their web pages, but they've really turned a new leaf and are very modern and engaged, and there's a lot of vitality there, and they have a wide audience because they are doing a lot of social media outreach, for example. So for us to be able to say, we want to preserve the integrity of living here, we want to be welcoming to visitors and their revenue, and how can we best do all of that? So that's maybe bigger than a nutshell, but I think that's all I want to say. Does anyone have any questions about that committee? No? When's the next party? I don't know.
After the snow goes away.
After snow games. Where's Durand? Rotary was considering doing winter games, and now we have snow, but
I think the fire department might have some event at the fairgrounds for kids, but it didn't work out, the idea that we had.
it's a great idea. And so that's also, it's an engaging committee to be part of, because people do have really good ideas. Sometimes we can pull them off and sometimes we can't, but it's pretty, I'm really glad that the mayor had this foresight.
Yeah, one of the hopes is, we do get a lot of tourist traffic, and we do have a lot of events during the year, but historically the village has always kind of taken a bit of a hands-off or laissez-faire approach to village events. If someone wants to stage an event, then you file a special event permit, and if the department heads are okay with it, then you get to do your thing. And I realized over the last couple of years, and COVID kind of shined a bright light on this, that if we have better village coordination, then we can have, we can really extract the most community feel out of some of these events. And so that's, yes, Little Giant played a role in realizing that there's a lot of things that we need a committee to address, but it was more of a broad sense of wanting to, we don't necessarily need to be Watkins Glen and run a festival every weekend. 4 or 5 events a year is just fine, but let's get the most out of each one. Before we open it up to open Q&A on anything village related, or even not,
I have a question about the giant, about the gigantic giant.
can we circle back to it in 10 seconds?
Okay, is it possible to get the giant in
That was a quick 10 seconds.
in different positions? Like, can you stand the giant up or sit the giant down? Or
Because it looks
can
like
we roll the giant over or something?
It's a great question for the ETC chair.
You smashed it.
Dress them up.
I agree, Jules, he looks like he's having a good time.
Okay, coming up.
Yeah, the giant is staged because that's what the original giant looked like.
So
it is
it's as historically accurate as it could be without, and I think, Duran, we might have even considered, could we tuck it in the woods and wrap a branch around it like it was originally found at Japan? So, Jules, you just have to keep your imagination on the sunshiny side when you look at the giant.
Fig leaf, you can do a fig leaf.
Before we open it up to Q&A on anything not giant related, we did want to just specifically thank a number of folks who have really done a fantastic job over the last couple of years. I mean, 2020 felt like 5 years long all by itself, but our youth programming has really seen a terrific uptick in participation, largely due to those folks who are involved in this organization. So Paul Pennick from the school, Caitlin Olson, and by the way, I refer to her as the other Caitlin Olson. This is the 2nd grade teacher, Caitlin Olson. Same name, different spelling, actually. I think that's Supervisor Olson's name.
That's who it's meant to be.
That's meant to be Supervisor
So
Olson.
this is the youth commission membership.
I take that back. So Paul Pennick from the school, Ulysses Town Supervisor, Caitlin Olson, not the 2nd grade teacher, Caitlin Olson. Zone Washburn, Linnea Bergevin, Michael Darfler, and Ethan Crampton and Will Glennon, who are employees, but certainly put in the lion's share of the time in making the youth program what it is. Our CPZR members, we've mentioned the committee itself already, but the non-village board members currently are Noah Demarest, Greg Hutnick, Tom Myers, Dave Breeden, and Kathy Klemperer. Thank you all for your tremendous amount of efforts and work over the last 3 years. Street Tree Advisory Committee members, Mark Devakaitis, Nita Glenn, Karen Powers, and Michael Alberg. The ETC we just referenced, Nana Potenza and Karen Powers. Our Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals. So these are appointed official positions, but I did want to recognize their membership as they have had a lot of work over the last several years reviewing all manner of applications and whatnot. Our planning board currently consists of Rick Geiger, Mark Devakaitis, Michelle Matrani, Greg Hutnick, and John Alberg. Our ZBA consists of Tim Hamilton, Phil Carubia, Noah Demarest, and Mike Schlossberg. Scott Shively recently retired from that position after 15 years on the ZBA. So thank you to Scott for his long tenure of service, which by the way means we have an opening on ZBA. So if anyone, Deb Watkins, is interested in a seat, we have that opening. Taking care of T-Burg. I can't say enough about the folks in taking care of T-Burg, led by largely Karen Powers, but many devoted volunteers in that group doing a lot of the what I'll call the small but incredibly important things to help keep T-Burg beautiful. Flower boxes, the plantings, the events, the blue food cupboard in front of the Children's Village on Main Street was a taking care of T-Burg idea during the early onset portion of the pandemic. So thank you to that group. Have some ideas and some plans that if they're interested in could potentially broaden the scope of their efforts. Once we've talked to them about it and voluntold them what we have in mind for them, we'll see if they take that on. And then last but not least, wanted to thank Nancy Zahler, who is the recently retired Town of Ulysses supervisor. I made reference earlier to the state of relations between the town and the village, and I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but within my time on the board, and I think Ben Carver as well, there was a period of time when the relationship between the town of Ulysses and the village, particularly at the board level, was not fantastic. And by not fantastic, I mean it wasn't good. And that has improved steadily over the last decade or so. But as we all know, it only takes one person to ruin something. So when you have a desire to improve relations, it becomes extremely important who you have sitting in certain seats. And Nancy Zahler just did a fantastic job over the last couple of years during her relatively short stint as supervisor, particularly in 2020 as we began coordinating local response to all things COVID related. She, not often I'm at a loss for words. She was a fantastic partner and a fantastic individual to work with. Even when we disagreed over things like how we pay for EMS, she nevertheless understood the importance of the town-village relationship. I'm pleased that incoming supervisor Caitlin Olson, not the second grade teacher, shares that sentiment, and we have a good relationship with her and the current town board. And so I look forward to that continued great collaboration between the two municipalities. And then, of course, thank you to you all for coming. Thank you to village residents near and far, in attendance or not, for supporting us, for allowing us to do the work that we do so that we can continue to enjoy where we live, because after all, that's why we live here. So thank you, and I'll open it up to any questions about anything at all, I suppose.
I'm Kathy Wilsey, and I live at 52 South Street, which is adjacent to the right-of-way to Crescent Way, the other IMHS proposed project. I was very disappointed last fall that I was not informed that the building next door was going to be demolished. I found out the day before from a neighbor who happened to have someone at the I had specifically asked Mr. Myers that I be informed of that. So my comment today is that I hope the neighbors will be informed when the trees need to come down from that right away. There are 10 or 12 giant spruces within about 50 feet. They're all packed together in there. And I think we need to know, and our pets need to know.
Thank you. Yeah, I will. So that's actually a hornet's nest question, or not. It was a comment, not a question. We will make every effort to notify you as best we can, and the reason I say it that way is there are legal ramifications to informing residents of other private entities' activities. So for instance, if you, using as an example, if you were to decide that you are going to do a large project on your house, demolition obviously being the most, the largest example, there are legal issues with the municipality going to the neighbors and saying your neighbor is doing X, Y, or Z with their private property. So that's why the notification piece is not as robust as we might otherwise like it to be. But certainly with respect to the trees, and I will reach out to INHS and ask them that when that piece starts, that they would please make sure that the neighbors are notified. Just in the interest of being a neighbor, then I expect that they would.
They're huge trees, it's not going to be a single-day project.
Yeah, understood.
I will just quickly, just so you know, in general, because this comes up, for many years I was an arborist myself, and this is what I did for a living. Trees are particularly difficult because in addition to what Jordan said, they tend to be scheduled. First of all, they don't require approval to do tree removals, so there's no technical required interaction with the village to remove trees. So we may not hear about it, just so you're aware. And then the scheduling tends to be when there's a good weather day. So we'll, like Gordon said, we'll certainly do our best, but just so you know, there's a lot of constraints on tree specific. That will be difficult.
Yeah, the house piece at least, it requires a demolition permit, there's village involvement, but then you get into the private property privacy issues. The tree piece, notification will have to come from the property owner, but I will reach out to them and ask that they please provide that.
I know taking care of T-Bird isn't particularly a board issue, but I guess there's an executive committee. We're meeting Monday to put our heads together to get through a year without our strong leader. It's going to be different, and I think things that we might have thought we were going forward with, we have to scale back. We have to keep this going and strong and not let anyone in particular feel like it's going to fall off because they're not here. But it's going to be, Trumansburg is going to be different. So we are meeting Monday to divide up and conquer among 6 of us what one person has been doing. So that's where we're at, taking care of Peter at the moment.
And I'd also like to add to that I know that, is this name on? That Ben Darfler, in his capacity with DPW Commissioner, has been a great friend to taking care of T-Berg, and I think that in coordination with them, but the village ETC will be your most direct contact to help get things done. So
ETC would be?
Yeah, and then we can help. We'll get together, but I want you to know that you have support from the village board and from the people on the ETC committee, which will also include Karen, and so might expand in that. But you are all tremendously capable, and so I know this change will be difficult, but I'm confident that we can all help.
Because we're all over 70 and can't move anymore?
Yeah, you're also feisty and capable.
You're not over 70.
Not yet, no, not yet. I am the young one on the group. I'm the baby.
Youngly sure.
Any other questions?
Well, I do have a question about rent. Are the prices of rent going to keep going up in Trumansburg compared? I lived in Ithaca for 42 years, and I moved out here. I love it. I don't want to go back. Is it going to keep going up? Especially when you're single and you've worked pretty much half your life by yourself.
So you're asking me to put on my market prediction hat. Okay. I do have one of those.
You left it home.
The short answer is I'm afraid probably so. Now, at what pace, I don't know.
Well, it's gone up considerably. It's like I bought a house again. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, housing and housing-related issues are something that is a large topic of conversation at every level. The pandemic did some really interesting things to real estate, none of which were predicted. And I think when folks found out that they had to stay home for a period of time, they suddenly realized they should like where they live. That in combination with a move to remote employment, coupled with the fact that large employers have realized that they can in fact extract more work out of the good employees when employees are allowed to work from home because there is no office to leave your work at. All of these factors contributed to the rise in housing values, and that then has a follow-on effect to rental prices. So it becomes a question of housing stock, what's available. Not to get out into the weeds on this one, but in February, annually, historically, there are approximately 200 homes for sale in the greater Tompkins County area. So that includes part of southern Portland County, part of Schuyler County, part of Seneca County. As of last week, there were only 97. So we have a historically low amount of homes for sale and a high demand. And I think that has to moderate at some point, but I can't tell you when everyone will be where they want to be, because you have the cycle of folks who need more house space because their family's growing, to the other end where they need less house space because they're downsizing. and everyone in between. So it's not something the village has, that any government has control over, certainly when it comes to housing prices or rental prices, except around the margins when you start to have conversations about zoning. You know, what are we going to allow to be built? How much freedom does a property owner have to put in an accessory apartment over the garage kind of thing? So it's like I've heard zoning described, zoning for the purposes of controlling that type of housing environment I've heard described as trying to steer the Titanic with an oar. You're making small changes that can potentially have a large effect, which is part of the reason why I think the thoughtfulness of those changes is so important. But it also means that any changes that might occur that could have the effect of moderating the speed with which prices are going up, any of those effects are going to take a long time to take effect. So that was all a really long-winded way of saying I think increasing prices don't go away, and I just don't know if they maintain the speed of increase.
What confuses me is I know how, because Ithaca has had several colleges. I worked at Ithaca College at one time too. And I think that's why they raised the prices up for apartments up there as much as they have. And is it because of Ithaca it's coming this way too?
Sort of. I tend to see if there's a commonality, I tend to see it around school districts.
Yeah.
So if there are school districts where folks would like their kids to attend, you tend to see higher housing prices, which would include rental prices. There tends to be a desire, just like you stated, there tends to be a desire for a lot of folks not to live in a city. So then your choices are, if you want the same amenities, if you want, good food, if you want high-speed internet, whatever the category of item is that you desire, that's not available everywhere. So it tends to be a small subset of your outlying communities that check all those boxes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you to all of you.
I did want to mention briefly about the zoning piece, that is very much part of the conversation that we've been having over the past year around zoning. And Roran's not wrong that just because zoning allows for something doesn't mean it's going to crop up the next day. But what we have been looking at with zoning is how do we enable people to create different types of housing, different variety of housing, smaller housing for single individuals, different sorts of approaches to creating housing in the village while balancing the look and feel and what we have here that brings people here, right? So this is always kind of intention. But I'm personally interested to see what can be done in backyards, above garages, turning a large a large family home into a duplex or a threeplex, that sort of thing. I think a lot can be created here without drastically changing the look and feel of the village, in a hope that then creates more space, different variety of spaces, and ultimately helps keep those prices in check. Again, it requires us as a village to allow those things to happen through our zoning, but then it also requires people to come in and actually make those changes, and so that's where we have to kind of wait and see. But currently, as our zoning stands, it makes those things very difficult, if not impossible. And so that is at least one clear, stumbling block in the way of creating more of that kind of housing that we're looking for. And so I'm optimistic that the zoning changes that we're going to propose midway through the year we'll address those things. That's what the idea has been. And in part, one of the reasons why I wanted to see that kind of phased approach is we've spent a good year on these changes. We'll still review them and go through the whole process, but can we get those out in the community sooner rather than later and see if they can't start having some sort of impact? So we'll see how that works.
Thank you all, and thank you for today.
As a board, you're doing too well, and so you're attracting people, which is keeping the prices low.
Yeah,
Yeah, hi, so I've been hesitating to bring this up because I think technically I need to go to the town of Ulysses, but it happened in Trumansburg and I think you should know about it. On December 23rd, I was driving over our brand-new bridge on Cemetery Street, and it was maybe 2 inches of snow, and as I crossed the bridge, I lost control and went into the woods. So I think there should be some kind of sign that warns people that, I mean, I don't know, maybe the bridge is icing over faster. I'm pretty experienced at driving in the snow, so I thought I was doing all the right things, except I probably shouldn't have gone that way, but I just think in the village we should be aware of it. And also, a shout out to Officer Colbert, who answered the 911 call and was really wonderful. You know, it was 11 o'clock at night, so it was rough. So just information.
Thank you, and I'm super glad you're here to tell us.
Yes, yes, I had 3 young people and a cat in the car, and everybody was fine, thank God. Yeah.
Yeah, we will coordinate, DPW will coordinate with Town Highway to take a look at that.
Okay, good. I mean, am I right? Is that something I should talk to Ulysses about?
Not necessarily.
Okay, thank you.
Not if you want an answer, just kidding. Just
Whoa.
kidding, just kidding.
There goes those good relationships.
Yes, so just as a response here, you know, Juniper Manor is a lovely place to live too.
Well, when
relative
I
of
run
the-
out of money, that's where I'll probably go.
Yeah, get on the list.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Requirement to take at least 2 donuts with you at a
Well, thank you all for coming. We, this is a village board meeting, and we actually do have need of a brief executive session. So once you've taken 2 donuts, we will be.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.